This is Baxter Colburn, host of the Verse of the Day podcast. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Kim Meyer, the host of Choose to Rise here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Choose to Rise, where we talk about living with positive mindsets, how to increase our confidence, building our faith, and living out our life on purpose. A new show comes out via podcast every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And if you want to catch the episode live instead, stop by Public House Media around 6:45 Central Standard Time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday as well. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of Choose to Rise. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to your Soccer Passport. I'm Ivan Sanchez Carrasco, and we're switching it up today. What's up, Brice?
Not much. I'm down here in Green Bay, traveling for work, so I'm doing the podcast from the Stadium View Bar and Grill in Green Bay, Wisconsin. It's a busy show today. We're talking the Champions League semifinals. We got one game going on as we record between Liverpool and Barcelona. Also got some Europa League stuff to talk about, as well as the women's game. Ada Hegerberg from Norway saying that she is not playing in the Women's World Cup this summer. We'll see what that means for Norway's chances, as well as the Women's World Cup as a whole in the second segment.
That's right, and Your Soccer Passport is brought to you by Public House Media. Along with Your Soccer Passport, Brice, part of what you're doing out in Green Bay is something that the company's kind of got going on with some teams. You want to explain that a little more before we head into the show?
So it's not me personally. A lot of this is Baxter Colburn, who is one of the top dogs here at PHM, and he's done an amazing job so far with bringing together some great opportunities for Public House Media here in the current soccer season. If you've been a fan of PHM Sports on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, you'll know that PHM has brought together a new podcast called Let Me Be Forward that talks about the Madison Forward FC, which is in the USL system. But he's also brought in a group with the WPSL, the Green Bay Glory, which is where I'm at right now. The Green Bay Glory will have their games broadcasted live here on Public House Media. Baxter Coburn will be part of that group. Madeline Cum is also part of that group as well. So to bring these games and to be here in Green Bay right now, knowing that Public House Media has the opportunity to help broadcast these games, help promote the women's sport, help promote soccer in Wisconsin, and just the smaller segments, not the pro, like not the big ones, of course, but promoting soccer across the country right now, even in America's heartland like Wisconsin, is such a great opportunity for all of us at Public House Media, and it's a great opportunity for our fans to listen and care about the sport and learn about the sport a little bit more.
Everybody shout out, keep your ear out for that. Now to our show. We got a big one. Currently, day of recording, Tuesday, time we usually record. Champions League, the second leg of Liverpool-Barcelona is going on. First leg, Barcelona just waxed Liverpool 3-0, getting a really nice result at home. But within the first 5 minutes of kickoff, Liverpool at home needing at least a 3-0 win to push the game into extra time. Got an early goal already from Origi, doing it without Mo Salah, who was out with concussion, doing it out with Firmino. But, I mean, I kind of thought about talking to this game before they scored, now kind of throws out the window, and now Liverpool puts himself in a really nice position to make a game out of this, Brice.
Well, the thing about Liverpool right now is that they put so much of their offense through Salah that they have to have something different. And the best part of that scenario is that there's not a lot of things that Barcelona can prepare for in that, because they don't do it very often. As much as Salah was a forward and that striker and who they were running that offense for, it's like having a quarterback change, really, in the NFL. Like, we talk about how important the NFL quarterback spot is. You have that striker in the same way when he dominates the ability to push the offense the way that he does. So now that Salah is out and that they're missing some guys in the back that can really advance the ball forward, they have to come up with a different offensive style. And it showed right off the bat, because for Origi, who got the putback, he got the garbage goal. It's a hockey-type goal where the ball comes off a pretty easy save, but the goalie can't deflect it in the right direction, puts it for an easy putback for Origi just right there on the doorstep. And that came down because it was a united front on that offensive front line. It was one that I'm not sure if they'll be able to maintain or get 3 goals like that throughout this matchup for Liverpool, but they have the ability to at least make it a game. And now Barcelona's had to start going back hard the other way. They score a goal with away goals. They're pretty much it at this point. So you want to make sure that you can get one on the goal, one on the board if you're Barcelona. But that being said, Liverpool is just going to do everything they can to stay in their offensive half, and they're going to allow the counterattack possibilities. This back and forth is not what we're used to from Liverpool. It's not what we're used to from this offensive mindset that the EPL has had as a whole, because not really any EPL team in the Champions League this year has really kind of used that technique. It's very different and very last second, and it'll be a fun time to see if they can capitalize on that stuff enough to push it to overtime.
Yeah, I think so. And Liverpool actually played really well in the first half, for the first leg, for the first 60 minutes. They made Barcelona really uncomfortable with their pressuring. I don't think Barcelona is used to being pressured at that rate, at that speed, in the specific area about halfway through their own half by Barcelona or by Liverpool in the way they were pressing. So I think they were caught off guard. Luckily, the prediction I made about Messi being Messi worked out last week, because he was phenomenal with a free kick and then another goal, and that was kind of the main difference. Besides that, Liverpool was going to feel hard undone by what happened last week, but it kind of shows the fight they've had all year with this, and it'll be interesting to see if they can keep up the pressure, like you said. I think something there is kind of an advantage too with having Mo out and Firmino out is Barcelona doesn't really have any game plan to prepare for the different lineup, and it could just kind of catch them off guard. And if Liverpool want to switch the manner in which they attack, how they want to attack, and through which channels they want to attack, something that there's probably not a lot of film all year without Mo and Firmino on the field. So. And maybe that's something that Liverpool can kind of bank off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's got to be the way that they have to go. I mean, when you play the chess match, that is soccer a lot of times. The reason why they call it the beautiful game is because there are so many aspects of watching from up high and seeing how the play comes together, and like all the chess moves that move into it. And so I'll use the chess analogy here. If you're dealing with chess pieces here, the best way to beat a computer is to throw them something that they've never seen before and watch the algorithms completely break down about what the highest probability of efficient moves come down to. When you look at a guy like Suarez over there on Barcelona right now, he's a guy that can make a mistake because now he's just going to act like the punk that he is, and he's going to get overly cocky, and there's a chance that he's going to get a yellow card before the first half's over. And that puts him a little cautious now moving forward. You can kind of do these kind of these moves to like either draw a couple yellow cards. You can either push on the outside a little bit more and bring it back in from a deeper part in the attacking zone, which is something that I thought happened on that first goal too, with the way that they used their wingers. They actually used their center back on the wing and then kind of like did like a crossing route to get those guys open in different formats and create more separation on the defense, and the defense looked completely perplexed. The question is that with all these things that come about, you have to get this done by halftime. If you don't have this done by halftime, you'll make those adjustments and you'll just fall flat. So you either have to have more things that come up on the second half when you're even more desperate and you're more prone to mistakes, or you do it now and you get at least 2 goals here in this first half and move on from there. That's your only options right now if you're Liverpool.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that, and even though this will come out a day after we are talking about this, you guys kind of get the feel that while we're watching it with you. The game that will be playing day of when the show comes out, Ajax took a 1-0 win in London at Spurs. They're coming back home tomorrow, or they're playing after wrapping up the Dutch Championship as well. Brice, these boys are nails. This is not an accident. These guys have a legit chance of winning the Champions League.
I'm legit. I think whenever you're in the semifinals and there's only 4 teams to go, then yeah, I mean, it's hard to say that you don't have a legitimate chance unless there's one team that's that far ahead of everybody else.
Well,
you can't.
I mean, more like, last year Roma was in the semifinals, but no one actually expected Roma to win the Champions League. It was a nice story. It was a good run. But I don't think when you saw them in the semis, you're like, these guys are. You can't picture. I can't close my eyes and picture them holding the Champions League. We'll use another sports example. In college basketball, Loyola Chicago was a nice story, and they made the Final Four. But I can never picture them actually winning the championship, even though they had, at that point, the same 1/4 of a chance the other teams did. But this is different. This seems legit. If that makes sense, the way I'm kind of describing it.
I do, but I kind of take things from a little bit more of a practical standpoint in that when I look at what Ajax has done so far and that they've capitalized on their shots, when their shots on target are there, they are capitalized. And that is different than what we're seeing from teams like Liverpool or Tottenham where they're finding excuses about how not to win games. Or you look at a team like Barcelona that uses star power to overcome it. Ajax does have that team unity aspect. They are still the Loyola Chicagos of this tournament because of the teams that they had to beat to get here, which I think is more, more truthful and more of a testament about how good this team is. Because when I looked at the stats, Ajax had 10 shots on goal, 2 were on target. They had 48% possession. They were just under pretty much all the stats that you had against for Tottenham, but Tottenham had only 1 shot on goal. They made that stop when they needed it, and that's a big thing. I like what the defense has been doing when it's coming in towards the box because they've been shutting down the good shot lanes, and they've been shutting down the probability of finding another option away from the goaltender. And so when you're giving your goalie such a positive chance of sitting back there and saying, I know that they're only going to have 1 or 2 lanes to shoot through, and I know that I can stop both of these lanes because they're both so close to where I'm at. I'm not dancing around. I'm not hesitating on making that decision, and I'm going to have a higher save probability than what I have in other games. And I've watched this in every round so far for Ajax is that they have come together on defense to limit the amount of quality shots. They're forcing them outside, way outside now, and nobody's hitting them. And some of that deals with Ajax and getting lucky. Some of that deals with the other teams not capitalizing on the chances that they're given. And when you look at that, it creates a different opportunity and a different feel, that feel that you were talking about, for what a Champions League team actually really does and brings to the table. This is a defensive-minded Champions League team, and we haven't seen that with everything that's been brought to the table by Barcelona or even Juventus last year. Like all the teams that have come in have made some really beautiful goals. It hasn't been that defensive-minded championship in the Champions League in a while, and I think Ajax could do that.
Yeah, I think you made a good point about their defense because we are so mesmerized of when they actually have the ball and in their manner in which they create. And when they're on the attacking foot, it is nonstop attack for them. But they do it in such a unique way where they don't have to push up their wide backs as high up as they want because they have their outside forwards so outside wide. It creates these nice channels for their midfielders to kind of get in. And they're able to attack with six guys normally instead of having your wing backs push out the way Real Madrid would do with Marcelo or the way Barcelona does Jordi Alba. And because they've been so mesmerizing in the pace in which they go at you and the fact they don't stop attacking you for 90 minutes, we kind of have lost track about how well they've been able to siphon these big teams. They were better than Real Madrid over 2 legs. Part of it was how well they were able to kind of neutralize the attack. The same thing with Juventus, where they've been able to neutralize the attack. And similar here with Spurs, and the thing is too, when Juventus or when Ajax has the ball, they attack with a purpose. They attack with an idea. These guys have great communication. They have great feel where the other person is going to be, and there's a purpose to it. And then you kind of at times you see the opposite when the teams have the ball against them. They do such a good job of frustrating you just enough where you can't attack with that same purpose because they have enough guys back. They've disrupted you just at the right spot. They're pressuring you just at the right place where you're not able to get a flow offensively. And I think you're seeing that with this tie as well. And Spurs have not been playing well. They lost again this weekend. They kind of backed into one of the Champions League spots for them too. So, this is, can they muster anything for the game tomorrow? I don't know. I think usually I would be going for Spurs in a situation like this because they're not one of the powerhouses traditionally either. But I think this story is too good for Ajax where they're going to make a Champions League final. It just seems like it's in the writing.
They have a lot of opportunities here, but I think the thing is that they're not going to change up their game plan. And not changing up their game plan is going to be a big factor in how comfortable they are. They don't have they're not playing from behind. They're not having to really do anything awkward with Tottenham, and Tottenham's all over the place right now with the EPL, and the EPL season's wrapped up. I mean, it's still kind of a blah ending for a lot of those teams in the EPL this year, including Tottenham. And so I look at all of this, and I look at how they've developed, and I look at how they've come together, and Ajax, I think, is the better team right now, and they're hot, and all those things come in and help them out.
Yep, that's true. Okay, quickly moving along, since you did bring up some blah teams, Chelsea and Arsenal are both in the Europa semifinals. Arsenal goes to Valencia tomorrow. They're up 3-1 after winning at home last week. Chelsea's at home tomorrow after drawing 1-1. Interesting thing that manifested over the weekend as well. Chelsea wrapped up one of the 4 Champions League spots after Arsenal tied at home to lonely Brighton. So Arsenal, this probably has more for Arsenal trying to make the finals so they can get that automatic finals or Champions League spot through winning Europa League. But does either Frankfurt or Valencia have any way to counter the two England teams, or are we going to have an all-England final?
Well, Valencia's been hit or miss all season as well. Valencia, I don't think, has done a very good job in La Liga either. They've been kind of distracted by everything else and spread too thin with their roster right now. I've been kind of underwhelmed by Valencia all year, so I don't think that they have the firepower to make up the goal differential, which means that I'm looking at Eintracht versus Chelsea, and that first game happens and it's tied, and they only had one shot on goal. They only had the possession for a third of the game, and their pass accuracy was only 2/3. So, you put these things together, and they're not creating the opportunities. They're making mental mistakes. They're almost panicking a little bit when they get control of the ball. And so there's a good chance that, if they move forward, they're going to do it by accident. And they're going to do it by a dumb luck goal. It's going to be like an own goal or a bad penalty, and then they just happen to grind it out. If there's more than 2 goals scored in this matchup, I cannot see Chelsea losing, just because Eintracht does not have the offensive firepower to make a difference.
I'm going to give you one counter. Luka Jovic, he's got 17 goals in the Bundesliga. He's got 9 goals in Europa League. He's the guy who got the goal last week for them. He has kind of been their superstar that's kind of led that attack. And, big teams going after him this summer probably too. But I think you're right. I think Chelsea will stifle them a lot and kind of really force them to... Actually, Frankfurt has to attack too, because 1-1 away, it's the away goal rule too. So I think it all kind of does play in the Chelsea's hands.
Yeah, when you look at what Eintracht has to do, they have to stop and think about how to get the ball forward and Chelsea's better on the counterattack anyway. That's why I think that they'll be able to put at least one goal in on this matchup while kind of playing more towards their defensive background. And when you have that kind of combination, I think the defense first Chelsea is going to be better than an offense first Eintracht, and that is why I'm more comfortable in saying that Chelsea's going to take this one than I am saying that Eintracht's going to be able to take this away, unless it's a fluke. And like I'm looking at a bad penalty or a bad own goal in the first 15 minutes. If that's it. That's Eintracht's window.
All right.
Because
Well,
they have to play the majority of the game, not to the script going into everything.
yeah, that's true. So I think we're both on the same page. We're looking for all England final with those two. But yeah, we'll be right back with our second segment when we're going to dive into women's soccer right after this on Your Soccer Passport.
This is John Lauder, host of The Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, The Cheap Seats, where we talk about sports from the fans' perspective. A new show comes out every Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Cheap Seats. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
And welcome back to Your Soccer Passport, presented by Public House Media. I'm Ivan Sanchez Carrasco, and I got Brice Berg with me as well, my co-host. You can find Brice on Twitter on that Brice Berg, Brice with an I, and find me as well at Ivan Sanchez C90 while we talk soccer and any other sports as well. And Brice, we're going to get ready for the Women's World Cup, and the pretty big headline is the reigning and first ever female Ballon d'Or winner, Ada Hemberg out of Norway, will not be playing in this summer's World Cup, refusing to represent Norway out of a manner of protesting the inequality in Norwegian soccer, and the federation has shown from the men's to the women's. How big of a news is this from 1 to 10?
I would say that this is an 8.5 or a 9. It depends on how good you thought Norway was heading into the tournament. And so Norway was a team that looked to give problems to the Frances and the United States and the Australias of the world, but they weren't necessarily a favorite, and they weren't even necessarily a dark horse in a lot of initial picks before the rosters came out. But when you look at what a loss of her clout does, is that you just lost your biggest star to a news story that talks about the inequality of women's sports within their own national federations in a way that completely usurps the rest of the team. And that team cannot do anything now without it being brought up maybe 2 or 3 times every game that they play, no matter how far they go in the tournament, no matter if they win it all, no matter what pre-games, what post-games, nothing. All of this now is about her and whether or not she has a fair claim to what she is claiming. Now I say it that way because when we talked about women's sports and we talked about equality with women's soccer, we talked about the struggles that it came down to for the powerhouse teams like the United States, the Australias, and even Mexico to a point, about how difficult it is to both balance out the fact that you need to be equal between men and women for the aspects of your own internal development of each country, compared to how much disparity happens between other countries just in general with how they fund things, with how they present their sports, with the struggles that with way more basic women's rights struggles to even get these teams on the map to begin with. And that comes up a lot. And out of all the regions in the world that you can't pull that with, it's Europe. Europe is the most equal footing of any regional body for women's soccer in terms of who the best team is and who the worst team is, in terms of fairness about looking at teams to teams. It's not like the United States where they're pushing for things and they have some like legitimate beefs with the U.S. Soccer Federation, and they should absolutely be fighting for that. But a lot of the stuff that the U.S. Soccer Federation does and has a foot to stand on their own is done to make sure that teams like Panama, Jamaica, and Haiti can also compete in these tournaments. And that's a big factor. When you look at Norway and you look at one player sitting out, and you look at one player sticking out in a region that is better, and you start looking at these comparisons, you start looking at the actual aspects of the Norwegian Soccer Federation, then you are taking away the narrative of what the other teams that are fighting for women's soccer equality are doing. And I'm not sure, as I also kind of privilege check myself a little bit, I'm not sure what the right answer is in this, because you have absolute problems in women's sports inequality. You have absolute problems in funding, in healthcare, in injury prevention techniques, in turf quality, and stadiums that they play in. But Norway is not nearly as bad as some of the other groups are. It's all internal. It has no external aspects. And you get to the biggest stage in the external aspect, and now you're throwing your entire country under the bus because of your internal country struggles. And I just don't know how I feel about that, because it's a completely different situation than every other women's rights issue in soccer right now. And that it brings up a different type of discussion, and it's a discussion that we haven't had yet.
You bring up a lot of good points.
It creates a different scenario. So I've been talking for a while. How do you feel about it?
Oh no, I loved a lot of what you said. I think this is interesting when we think about it through an American's perspective for the Women's World Cup, because I don't think most women's soccer fans of the United States would recognize Ada Hamburg, just because we are so infatuated with the women's team here in the United States and how good they are, and we don't and if that makes sense, you know what I mean? We are so just focused on our team and our issues and how well they've done and what they haven't gotten, that we forget this is the reigning Ballon d'Oro winner. This is the best player in women's soccer, and she actually hasn't played for Norway for 2 years on this same stance. And you bring up the part about Europe culture. It's I think it even goes farther than that in Scandinavian culture, and how you talk about equality in the way they tend to treat minorities different than other parts of the world. And I think if her principles are she wants it to be equal, the way shouldn't feel that the Norwegian Federation has treated the women the way they should be treated. I don't think there's a better stance than to do it during a World Cup when all eyes would be on them, and she would be one of the big talking heads. This would be somebody I think people in the United States, when they're watching the World Cup, would learn more about. And now there's going to be conversations, instead of, like you said, of her not being there. I think that's one of the best ways to bring it up, to be honest with you. And it's so easy to say you're going to do these things and you want to fight for all these things, and then when the World Cup comes around, something like that, you say, okay, well, we'll figure it out, and we'll figure it out later. But I'm still mad at you, but I'm going to play this tournament. So I actually kind of like the fact that she stuck to her gun and said, no, I'm not going, and you guys know why. And this isn't, I don't think a stance like this is anything to dislike or disrepresent her country or anything like that. I think this is strictly something with the Federation, and I applaud this for her sticking up with it and fighting the Federation head on in those regards. Her sister's also not on the team, another player who would have made the roster. And so, yeah, these issues, because she's doing this, I think it's going to make it get brought up, and they're going to be highlighted in the most global way now, especially because it is a World Cup, and you need these kind of stories with all these different teams. So now the story for Norway is, instead of possibly being a dark horse, a team who can get out with a group with the host France in a tough team like Nigeria, but also have South Korea, that they did have a possibility of making it out of group. They still do, but when you're missing the world's best player, now all of a sudden that conversation switches, that focus switches, and the problems that might have been a little more localized are becoming more of a global issue. So good on her, I think, if all of what I'm trying to, or the manner I'm trying to explain it makes sense.
I think that's fair. For me, my apprehensiveness is about how it will play out. Because we can talk about this all day long in terms of the pros and cons, but until it's actually done, then there's a whole nother argument. And I'm just apprehensive about it, because this is what sucks, and I'll open up a little bit, is that because I went on a trip home and everything like that, and kind of reminded myself about why I don't like where I grew up, is that there's a lot of backwards thinking, and there's a lot of gaslighting, and there's a lot of false equivalency that is used to discredit people when they try to stand up. We've seen this with anything from people that don't stand for the flag, to people that make post-game comments, to anything else. If they take a stand in pretty much any way, somebody's going to go out there and gaslight them and just say, like, no, what you're doing is wrong. Stick to sports. Don't bring this stuff up. And for me, I'm curious about the level of back and forth, because I look at the United States women's national team. They're all there. They're still complaining. They got lawsuits. They got legal stuff. They got that kind of stuff that's got some really interesting back and forth thing. So, but they're the ones that are there to be able to say, hey, yes, I'm there. Let me use this as a platform to stand up on. And Edinburgh is not there. She's using her absence. And as the fight for equality continues to go on, we're going to see both techniques in play. And we're going to see two very different types of people in terms of the women's national team, which is almost like the unionized approach, and then the star-studded approach that she uses in Norway. We're seeing both used at the same time. And in terms of civil rights aspects moving forward, it's not something that you point out very often. Like, I mean, even back in school, people don't talk about the technique difference between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., even though they had two very different techniques, and both of them were so important to the civil rights movement in the United States. So for us now, we get, I want to point out that we're seeing both sides of this, and this is an active story. This is something that's actively happening right now.
Yeah.
It's our responsibility to pay attention to this and see how it plays out with a step back, an understanding of all things, and be as knowledgeable as possible, so that way we can help prevent this kind of situation in the future.
Yeah, so I have a quick...
It's an awkward social responsibility.
So I have a question for you, but before that, this kind of reminds me of her missing the World Cup by choice. For the 2014 World Cup, Mexico was trying to qualify. 3 years before that, the players had a party. 2 of them were suspended 6 months, including Carlos Vela. Carlos Vela refused to get called back up for the Mexican national team. He was doing fantastic over in Spain. There was rumors about him going to Barcelona. Mexico was struggling to qualify, and he refused to accept the invitation to go back, even though during that 2013 year, when they're qualifying and they're struggling, and he took a stance against the federation, saying, I don't appreciate the way you guys treated me, the way these things have happened, the kind of slight corruption, the things he found sketchy, and he took a stance and said no. And the federation went on and kind of painted him as this egotistical maniac, doesn't care about his country, this and that. So it'll be interesting to see. And he missed the World Cup. He didn't go to the World Cup in 2014. He just refused the invitation. He said, "No, thank you. I wasn't part of this process. It's not fair for me to now go to the tournament now that you guys are qualified. I wish you guys the best." Blah blah blah. He joins the team a year later, but he took a stance. He took a stance all three years through what he didn't find the federation to do was fair, the way they treated him, all these things, and he kept his word all the way up to the World Cup. This kind of reminds me of something similar to that, where she's holding the stance. Like now, when they might have expected her to buckle, she's saying no. So I think that's interesting and how it plays out. But what do you think would happen if some of these women took that approach here in the United States? Because we're talking about, you brought up how they're fighting for equality. There's lawsuits going, and during the summer and during the Women's World Cup, they are a humongous focal point of Nike of selling this tournament to people. But what if they didn't have an Alex Morgan or a Megan Rapinoe to put on top of these faces, to put on these billboards? What do you think that would have? If their absence, if they said no, do you think that would actually manifest into actual change if they held out in the biggest tournament?
No, because it would actually backfire on them in the fact that it would fuel any kind of economic development aspects that they're fighting for. I mean, their star power right now as a group is huge, especially with Megan Rapinoe and the LGBT community. And when you look at these groups kind of coming in together, they bring in all that money. And you brought it up primarily first. They are not caring about Hagenberg being there or not. They don't care about the best player in the world at the World Cup, in the United States, where they're going to get a lot of coverage. Australia, maybe some more in Canada or France. But those countries have their own stars too. And so for a podcast like ours, where we're talking about it in this way, it's a little bit of a different concept in terms of who your star actually is and where the money's coming from. The United States will buy things, and France will buy things. But France at home will not care about one other player stepping out. And the United States doesn't know enough. They're not smart enough of a market to play the world. So it's not like the Men's World Cup, where, especially this last year, where the U.S. wasn't there. Now, the United States men's team wasn't there, and they had like Messi and Ronaldo and all these like big name guys not go in there. I think there would be a little bit more of an impact in terms of how the United States media covers it. But when you look at what Alex Morgan will bring in for jersey sales, when you look at the big ongoing aspect of how Pride jerseys sell, and how that kept a player off the United States roster. There's a lot more about how those jersey sales go in. So as the unionized approach of the women's team so far continues to take hold, their best arena to fight is in the courtroom. They can use the United States Constitution. They can use United States labor laws. They can use Title IX protections in ways that are not equal and equivalent out in the rest of the world. And so for them to keep it in the courtroom is the best thing possible, and they will get detracted from. They will look like they're doing things in poor taste if they take away from something that could overall and fluctuate the numbers and not keep it a status quo. Because the more that there's a status quo, especially heading into the world's biggest tournament, and they can talk about how much money they actually brought in, when they can talk about television ratings, when they can talk about all those things that can statistically give them equality, and then they pull their best players out and all that star power, they're not going to have that. It's not going to be equal in that format, and their statistics go to trash, and they can't afford that in the legal process in the courtroom. So it's the things that are in play right now says that the United States women's team is doing everything they can in the right venue, in the right arena, and that means that they have to stay things at the status quo in the actual arena and on the pitch.
Yeah, I think you made a good point, and this is the fact that it was such a high-profile player in the women's game who's going to sit out and not, I think it just brings up the conversation. And I think the best we can do is make note of both situations, not light, but bring to light both situations, which we're going to continue to do when they come up in an appropriate manner, especially now that we're getting. Our focus is shifting from the domestic soccer into the Women's World Cup, where they're going to get a lot more of our attention. And these things are going to pop up. And I think one of the things we can do, and something I think you and I, not to pat ourselves on the back, but we have done, is bring up a lot of these issues when we do talk about them, because I think it's something that needs to be brought up. We're not just going to put a rug over everything and pretend nothing isn't happening.
Yeah, and I'm happy with how we've done that coverage so far. I mean, that being said, we're two guys just kind of covering the sport in an equal and open format. We've tried to play devil's advocate to be fair, but at the same time, as fans of the games, it's very difficult to actually not just come out and say how much that we support the women's group in this point. I think my coverage today was a little bit more slanted than usual when we talk about this stuff, because it is something that needs to change. But we as journalists, we as podcasters, do have to try to at least attempt to bring in both sides of things, or other context, other historical context, to really make sure that the points are driven home fairly.
Yeah, quickly, 5 minutes. Let's focus on the women's national team. Their roster came out. They have two friendlies next week, or Sunday they play South Africa. Thursday they play New Zealand. Any surprises or anything that kind of caught you off guard from the national team roster that will be going to the World Cup next month?
No, because we kind of knew that if everybody was healthy, this is what it was going to be. And so with all the injuries that were building up for the women's team heading up into this tournament, and the way that the friendlies have kind of developed for this roster, it is a completely different scenario. This team is finally healthy, and with health comes a higher responsibility of having your team the way that it needs to be set up. So I'm not surprised. I think we're going to learn more from their game against New Zealand than we will against the game against South Africa. That being said, both of those teams are in the World Cup. South Africa will be in Group B. New Zealand will be in Group E. And New Zealand, I know, is really looking at this opportunity positively, because they're going to be going up against the Canadians. And that Canadian-New Zealand matchup is going to be a big one in terms of who gets out, or possibly both, from that group, depending on how close or how big of a blowout that game is. So it's going to be a big matchup for the United States. They will take this seriously, and I think we'll learn most about the United States going into these two matchups than we will in the last 2 years of any kind of coverage for the women's national team.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm not surprised. No left back for the team, no traditional left back. They're going to kind of do a makeshift and kind of that they've kind of been doing the last couple of years. And yeah, kind of the way we've been talking about them leading up. Their attack is phenomenal. You got Heath, you got Lloyd, you got Jessica McDonald, Alex Morgan, Press, Puig, and Megan Rapport leading the attack. But then, as we mentioned, the goalkeeping has kind of been the rough situation for them the last couple of years, and the defense is also not as consistent as the attack. So not surprising, but I mean, you look at the attack they have, and the depth, and the way they're going to be able to throw different things at you. I mean, it's the deepest attack there is in the world, and even if they're not playing well, I think a lot of their successes here will have to come from outscoring players and getting those attacking players, finding the right combination of those attacking players, and then getting the midfield involved with Horan and trying to find the right balance. I think if they can't find the balance, they can get caught, not in the group stage, but going on into the knockout stage. This is something I've kind of stuck with. But yeah, the roster kind of looks like something that I'm not surprised about either.
Yeah, I mean, Sweden could possibly do it, but when you look at this roster, if they can use possession as a way to redevelop their team and redevelop their offense, because they have so many offensive options that it isn't difficult to just kind of swing somebody else around and have that help defense or have the help offense come back and reset a play at, like, let's say, just on the other side of the midfield line. If you can use the midfield part to really kind of reestablish your control and possession with good passing, with good communication. And then instead of like always going back and continue that pressure instead, then I think that the United States will have a lot more going into it. But I think right now the goal for the United States going into this tournament is to score 3 goals at least in every game and not let up. They cannot let up at any time, even though that they probably will to a point in terms of maybe swapping some players out. But it's not going to be. It's going to be equal 1-to-1s. It's not going to be put in defense and then let it ride. At least not until later on. I think Sweden's the only group that can really maybe push that out of them. But I think there's a big enough gap between the offense of the United States and every other team's offense that they will be the team to watch when they move forward with that ball, because they're going to create more opportunities and more dangerous scoring opportunities than any other team in this tournament.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and we'll get into it more, too, as we lead up about a month away from the Women's World Cup. But, yeah, I'm excited to start talking about it more, too, because I think the groups are fascinating. I think, like you mentioned, Sweden, being in a tough game, being in a battle with Sweden wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, because it'll be a nice little wake-up call, especially with Thailand and Chile kind of being weaker teams in the group. I think if they get a little battle early on, I think that kind of helps them refocus as the tournament goes on. Because I think I said in the past, and I'm not sure if I'm ready to lock it in yet, but, Spain's kind of been the team that I've kind of looked for to be a trap game for them in the knockout stage, where their style of play can kind of catch them and can be enough to frustrate them. But that's something we're looking forward ahead, and I'm not willing to put the house on it yet, even though we've been very high on Spain entering this World Cup too ourselves.
Well, when you go into this matchup and you realize that the way that the groups are set up and that, which third teams can potentially move along, that is a whole other wrinkle about making sure that you win your group, that you avoid certain teams. When you look at the group so far, and we will talk about that, which teams will get those third bids, whether it's in Australia or Brazil or Jamaica or China or Spain. Like, Group A's got some too, especially with Norway not having the Heddenbergs. It's a different situation for Norway now as they develop too. So all these things match up, and you've got those first 3 groups that you really don't know who's going to come out of them when you deal with the third place team scenario. So it makes it a completely different watchable experience than the Men's World Cup. I think it's a lot more fun because of it, with third place teams moving out. So we'll see how they develop from here.
All right. Brice, again, do you want to quickly remind everybody of the other soccer podcasts that Public House Media is doing, since you are in Green Bay?
Yeah, so I'm actually in Green Bay right now at the Stadium View Bar and Grill in the Stadium District of Green Bay. I can see Lambeau Field and the Rush Center from my seat here, where I'm recording my side of the podcast this week. It's sort of in line with some other things, but it's a great way to bring up the fact that Public House Media will be doing more with soccer in the state of Wisconsin. They have that Let Me Be Forward podcast that deals with Madison Forward in the USL system for the men, and this will also, Public House Media will also be your home for the Green Bay Glory in the Professional Women's Soccer League, which will be based out of Green Bay. Great opportunity for Public House Media to be involved with that and promote soccer at different levels across the United States. So great chance, and really excited to be here in Green Bay to kind of add some extra dimension to that coverage, and best of luck to the teams that will be covering the teams as well as the teams themselves.
All right, quickly my shout out, because we've gone long this episode, probably because I'm hosting, and I don't keep it as tight as you do. CJ McCollum from the Blazers, we need a big game out of you tonight. We're still battling playoffs, baby. You guys are in the Midwest, but I'm in Portland, so that's my shout out. So for Brice Berg, I'm Ivan Sanchez Carrasco. This has been your Soccer Passport, presented by Public House Media. Thank you guys for listening. Love you guys. Eat some cheese curds for me, Brice.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, bye, guys.